So the last time where we stopped off, I think, was around 57, 59, right when you got back from Newfoundland.
Well, that's when I took over Dr. Pfluger's practice, and I did general dentistry for a couple of years.
So what? Why did you decide to come to Austin versus go back to Wheeling or Pittsburgh or
Well,
wherever?
I'm going to brag on myself for a moment. I passed 5 individual state boards exams. I was going to school in Pittsburgh, so I took the first half of the Pennsylvania State Board. Then I drove to Texas with another doctor, Walt Hampy, and I took the whole Texas board, 5 days. I flew back to Wheeling on a Friday or Saturday, and on Monday I took the whole West Virginia board. So I had 2.5 boards at that point, and I went in the Air Force. And then at the end of the first year in the Air Force, I came back and took the rest of the Pennsylvania board, the second half. So I then had 3 boards, Texas, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. When I was in Columbia and I met Claire, I thought, well, I might want to stay in New York. So I took the New York board and the Connecticut board. And I'll bet you there's not one other guy in this state that has 5 individual state boards plus national boards. Well, anyway, when I was practicing general dentistry, I was friends with Dr. Richard Buck, who was up the street from me. And when he heard I was going to Columbia, he began writing me and telling me to come back and go in his practice with him because he was real busy and he needed an associate. So that was part of the decision. And then Nettie and Mildred were here, and I knew that if I went to Wheeling or Pennsylvania or New York, my parents would never get to Texas. My mother would never get back. And I wanted her to somehow to get back to Texas. So I knew it was really up to me. You know?
Really?
Yeah.
Why did you feel that?
Well, because it's the truth.
So do you think she would have gone to New York to
No,
be with you, or
she would have
stayed
stayed
in
in
Wheeling?
Wheeling. She would have stayed in Wheeling, and my dad too. And anyway, I came back and practiced with Richard Buck for a while. I don't know, 8 or 10 years, and then I went off on my own. And then in the meantime, my mother and dad did move down because my dad, his health began to fail, his mind began to fail. And so it worked out that way. I mean, that's what I'm saying. In the decisions you make in your life, you know, if I would have gone to Tufts when I first got out of the Air Force, I wouldn't have met Claire. I would have met somebody else and married someone else. I might have stayed in Boston, I don't know, because I wouldn't have known Dr. Buck. But I had practiced here for 2 years, so I knew a lot of the dentists. I sort of became familiar with a lot of people. And you know, most of my relatives were on my mother's side, and they were down here. My father's didn't have as many relatives, and they were in the Wheeling side. So coming here was not, you know, going to an unknown place.
Sure.
You know. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe I would have been better off going someplace else.
So, maybe you mentioned this the last tape, and I've forgotten. But when you were on that time between going to the Air Force and you came down here to practice general dentistry, what made you decide to come here versus just staying in the Wheeling?
Well, there weren't any opportunities in Wheeling.
Okay.
I mean, you know, when the Air Force wouldn't activate me, and they said I was going to have to wait a year, I didn't know where to go.
Yeah.
And no one offered to take me in and let me work in their practice. You know, like, I don't think anyone that had the real big practices. They didn't have high speed then, like, you know, the air turbines and things. So dentistry was a much slower profession. And the output that somebody could produce in a day was slower. And, you know, I didn't have any offers. That's when I went to work in that hospital for no salary. So when I came down here, Dr. Pfluger was getting ready to go to Tennessee, and I had an acceptance at Tennessee. He very well may have gone on the acceptance that I didn't take, because they had a January class, and I came down here in December. So he was going to go anyway. But when I came, it was interesting. He had a busy practice. It was a low-fee family practice. Most practices were low fee in those days. I could talk about that for 3 days. But anyway, he was talking with a man in service in the Army named Charlie Dissaker. But Dissaker wasn't going to get out of service until around June, which is the normal time of getting out. You graduate from dental school in May or June, you go into service and you get out 2 or 3 years later in the same month. But see, I went in the end of November because I lost those 6 months.
Right.
And so I was sort of here when Werner needed somebody immediately. So I didn't know this until years later. Charlie Dissaker then opened a practice over in East Austin. And later on he said to me, "You took my practice." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I was going to take that practice to Dr. Pfluger's." I said, "I didn't know. I didn't even know you existed at that time. You were in service out somewhere in West Texas." You know, we became friends. You know, we were just sort of kidding each other. But because that was sort of in a way, it was like a providential opportunity, because Werner gave me a whole practice for free. All I had to do was just pay him a little bit of rent. So you know, the day he stepped out, I stepped in.
Right.
And, you know, I had the same receptionist, Cherry Lynn Crouch, so she just kept booking me the same way, and I kept about probably 80 or 90% of that practice. Very few of them left me. And then when I went away, I gave it to Ross Rost. So, I mean, he was a good friend of mine. But at that time, he didn't have near the practice I did. And I didn't develop the practice, Werner did, because he had been there for about 20 years.
Right.
He had practiced a long time before he went off to orthodontics.
So when did you decide you wanted to get into orthodontics versus just general dentistry?
Well, when I was in service, I did.
Okay.
Actually, when I was in dental school. But, you know, I knew I was going to have to save money somehow, because I just couldn't keep taking money from my father.
Right.
You know, I didn't want to keep doing that. So that was another reason why I wanted to go into service. I wanted to do my tour, because after the Korean War, you know, after World War II, you had that Korean War, and they recalled a lot of dentists. There were a number of dentists that some of them were in the reserves and some of them weren't. I mean, if they needed you, they could just draft you. I mean, no matter what you think, you know, you can be drafted by presidential decree.
Right.
I mean, you know, the government can do anything they want, whether you think so or not. You know, your choice is go to jail or, you know. Well, anyway, I wanted to put in my tour and figure that if and when I ever started a practice, I didn't want to get drafted out of it. So that was another reason I wanted to go into service. And, you know, at first it was all messed up, but, you know, in the long run it worked out. There was a friend of mine, he sat next to me in dental school. His name was Santo Signorino. He was SI, I was SH. So it was right next to me for 4 years. And Santo didn't have near the grades I had. He was a really nice person, but he just wasn't academically, he was good with his hands, but he couldn't make the grades that I made. So I signed up for the Air Force, and he didn't sign up for any branch of service. And then he heard that they were starting an orthodontic program at Loyola in Chicago. So he applied for that and he got accepted. And he was the only student the first year that Dr. Jerabak had in that training program. So Jerabak beat him to pieces, but he made a phenomenal orthodontist out of him because he was like 1-to-1.
Right.
I mean, you know, you couldn't hire this kind of an education.
Sure.
So Santo got licensed in Illinois, and then he was working a little bit, I think, while he was in training. And then when he finished his training, Jerabak asked him to go into his office, and this other very famous orthodontist asked him to go into his office. So Santo had his own office and 2 part-time offices, and I was still in Newfoundland. You understand? That's how far ahead he was of me, because I was now 30 months shot, 2 years of service plus 6 months of waiting,
Right.
plus 3 more months, you know, you understand? And then I worked for 2.5 more years to get enough money to go to ortho. So in a way I wasted 5 years. So, you know, I go up to visit Santo. It's like my first year of practice. I got a couple patients. There's a orthodontic meeting in Chicago. I go up. Santo picks me up. He's got a black Cadillac about 1 block long. Biggest car I ever saw. Santo's an only child. His dad is a barber. Santo has a bouffant of hair. I mean, he has more hair than Jessica ever dreamt of, more hair than Claire ever had. It's just waves of hair, bouffant hair. Santo picks me up. We go to the Playboy Club. We walk in. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Sandy. Santo knows all these girls, you know. They're all coming around in their short outfits, hugging him a little bit. He's a big playboy. So we go from there to another one of these clubs, and hi, Sandy. Hi, Sandy. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, you know, here I am. I'm one of the top students in the class, and I'm at the bottom. Here's Santo, who was probably in the middle of the class, and he's got private practice. He's in with Jerabak. He's in with Graber. I'm in with Richard Buck, and I hardly have anything. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And he's so far ahead of me, I can't believe it. He's making so much money, and he doesn't know anything about investing. So he has a service investing his money. And the accountant's telling him, Santo, you got to do this with your money. You got to do that. You know, you're piling up too much money. You're paying too much in taxes. He had a tax problem, but I didn't even have an income problem. So anyway, Claire and I are married, and you know we're having children. And Santo marries this young girl who was his patient, and she always said, that SOB didn't marry me till after I finished paying him for straightening my teeth, and then he married me. But anyway, he married Anita, and they had 2 children, 2 beautiful children. Well, you know, the funny thing, somewhere in the next 15 or 20 years, I caught Santo and passed him. And I know that. I can't tell you how I know it, but I know it. You know, even... I was almost so far behind, I don't know how I could ever catch up. Mm-hmm. But I know financially, I know I passed them. And I think it was from investments more than practice. But, you know, at the time when I first, you know, I mean, we were always close friends.
Sure.
You know, I mean, we were the best of friends. And when I first saw him after getting out of the service and everything, I thought, my God, this, you know, he's so far ahead of me. You know, I mean, his life was, you know, his parents had moved from Pittsburgh to Chicago, and then, you know, later on he married, and it just seemed like his life was more orderly than mine was. Mine was just one thing or another. Mm-hmm. But then, you know, he died of prostate cancer. About, I I don't think he was 70. He was probably about
Really?
67 or 68. He died of prostate cancer. He said, life takes turns. You know, I would have never have thought that. I would never have thought that. He was the healthiest looking person I ever saw. And happily married and everything. A good orthodontist. And here I am, I'm still plugging along. I mean, your life takes twists and turns. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen. Where you think that other people are so far ahead of you and you're not getting anywhere. You know, you're just sort of plodding along and spinning your wheels and it seems like everyone's getting ahead of you. And it's not like that at all. You just have to stay with what you're doing and get up and go to work every day for 50 years and it works out.
So I think we have about 5 minutes left, maybe 10. Can you take me through? So I guess you work here in Austin in the late 50s to 1960, so like 57 through 60 or something like that. You go to Columbia. How long is that program? Is that a year or 2 years?
Yeah, a couple of years.
So
did I tell you how I met Claire?
no, that's what I was getting to. So you're in Columbia. You're in
Well,
York.
I'm at Columbia and I met a couple boys. I went to a dance or something in Brooklyn at a hotel, the St. George Hotel, and I met a couple boys. They were a little bit older than I am, but you know, and so once in a while I'd call them or they'd call me and I'd go and meet with them. So they said to me, there's going to be a party at this house in Brooklyn. You want to go to it? And I said, I don't know, I guess I'll go. If you want to go, I'll go. You know, I'll go along with you, whatever you want to do. There was a boy there who was Orthodox, and he went to the Orthodox seminary in Boston to become a priest. And he was there for 2 or 3 years, 4 years, whatever it was, and he decided he didn't want to become a priest for whatever the reason. He came back home, and his sister had a party to introduce him again to sort of the girls, you know what I mean, in the neighborhood. I think the boy, whatever the reason, you know, you can be married you can be an Orthodox priest and be married, as long as you're married before you're ordained.
Okay.
So some of the boys that finish the seminary as Orthodox priests, if they're not married, they won't take ordination if they want to get married till they marry. Then they get married, then they go and get ordained. Well, he just didn't want to become a priest for whatever the reason. So he came back, and so we go to this party, and it was a party, I don't know, June or July, a nice summer evening. And there were people in the house and people in the yard. And I was in the yard for most of the party. For some reason, I was visiting with people. And then they began serving some food and refreshments, and I went into the house. And I looked across the room, I see these two girls, and it's Claire and Frida.
Really?
Yeah. So I mosey over, began talking to them, and I sort of like Claire, you know, she's a little different, you know. So I don't know. Maybe we got in line to get the food. I don't know. I don't know if we sat together while we had refreshments or not, but somewhere along the line I asked her for her phone number. And she said to me later, she said, I thought you were a big flirt, you were never going to call me. But she gave me her phone number. And I was wondering, you know, do I want to ask out Frida or Claire? But Frida was a little tall for me. She's pretty tall.
Yeah, she's tall.
She and Nikki lined up a lot better, the boy she married. Anyway, so I have Claire's phone number. I thought, oh, I don't know. Brooklyn, it's, you know, I'm in Columbia, 168th and Broadway. It's 168 blocks down, and then the tunnel, and then another 50 or 60 blocks to where Claire lives. Claire lives in a beautiful residential area. You wouldn't think it was Brooklyn. I mean, the homes there were beautiful. So I know this one man in our orthodontic program, Rocco DiPaolo, who became one of my best friends. I said to Rocco, I met this girl, it's a pretty nice girl, I'd like to take her out. He said, well, where does she live? And I had called Claire and got her address, I think. Or maybe somewhere I knew. I said, I know about where she lives, such and such. Because she lives near this place where I went to the party. He said, you ought to take her to the Hamilton House. That's very close. It's a real nice restaurant. You know, you won't get lost or anything. And, you know. So I call her up and say, you know, you'd like to go to dinner? Yeah, so. We go down to the Hamilton House. And I order Cornish game hen. So she said, well, I'll have the same. So the Cornish game hen comes, you know, and she doesn't know how to eat it. She's never had this before. She looks at this bird, you know, the whole bird. She doesn't know whether to pick it up, you know. You eat it like an ear of corn. You know, meantime, this is what she said to me. She said, you're like a surgeon. You're cutting this bird apart and eating it, and I'm looking at this thing. I don't know how to attack it. I don't think she ate any of this, this Cornish game hen. Anyway, that was our first date, you know, and I think she must have gone home and eaten when she was home, because she didn't eat much that night. One more story. I don't know what day, first or second or third, I don't know. She said something like, would you like to come in? Because the first night, I think I just let her go at the door. I said, yeah, all right. So she asked me in, she said, then she didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. So she said, would you like a cup of coffee? I said, all right. And then she got flustered. She ran upstairs and got her father to come down and make a cup of coffee. And I mean, I didn't care about the coffee she suggested. You know, like, as if she would have said, would you like a glass of water? Would you like, she said, would you like a cup of coffee? I said, all right. You know.
So in the meantime, you're downstairs wondering what to do.
I'm wondering, she's upstairs and her dad comes down in a bathrobe, and slippers, and he puts the coffee on, and then he says to Claire, you know, let it cook so many minutes or whatever it was. And I ended up with a cup of coffee.
Nice.
I think we ought to quit it tonight.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure we got
Anyway,
that. Oh yeah, we got
you
that.
know, it's nice to have a little levity. Not everything in life is sadness, you know.
Sure.
I don't mean to give that impression, because it's not. But anyway, we had a few laughs when we were going out, and the Cornish game hen was one. I had Cornish game hen 2 or 3 times in service, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I had an idea of how to attack it.
And how long did you guys date before you married?
Oh, it was about 6 months.
6 months. So you just knew, huh?
When you go out with the right one, you know it right away. You know, it doesn't take 2 or 3 years of living with somebody.
Right.
That's the worst way to do it. The way these people are doing it now. You know, you know it right away. And I told Rocco, I said, you know, I'm starting to like this girl. What are you, crazy? You just met this girl. I said, Rocco, come on, will you? I said, I think she's a very nice girl. I mean, what do you have to know her? Well, you just met her. I said, I didn't just meet her. I've taken her out 3 or 4 times. I mean, you can tell.
Yeah. So did her father ever give you a hard time?
No.
Like intimidating?
Her father was a very sweet man. You know, the mother was volatile, like Stromboli, always erupting. Father was a very sweet man, but he died too young. He got, I think, Hodgkin's disease. You know, like
Really?
it's like a cancer of the bloodstream. You know, so, something like that. We always thought he was 62 when he died, but Lorraine said he was 64. But he died at age 64.
Mm.
And we were married in 62.
So okay, so you went to Columbia in '60. You were in school
60
for
or
about
62,
a year.
we got married, and he got sick not too long after that. And he was sick for, I'm going to say about a year, I don't know for sure, before he died. So, you know, I saw him a couple times, but that was all. But he died young. And he was quite a man. He was building a bunch of women's stores in New York. If he would have lived, you know, he would have done very well. He was a good you know, he was good with merchandise and knowing how to buy and how to, he was very nice to people. He got along with everybody.
Hmm.
That's quick
All
for
right.
tonight.
Sounds good to me.